Planet Zoo, a game where you can make whatever kind of zoo your heart desires. I have never been good with this game, but I wanted to do something different, as I feel like I've been getting a little repetitive with my Jurassic World Evolution 2 content. So I've decided to do a sandbox zoo of Planet Zoo. We will be starting today's episode by just doing a simple entrance, but make sure to leave suggestions for what you want to see in this zoo. Make sure to like, subscribe, and we'll do all the good things, and let's get into it. I wanted to make sure this zoo started out right by making the zoo entrance really nice, so I decided to use plaster for the floor. Ultimately, I decided to trim it down a bit because I thought it was a bit big, and I think that was definitely the right way to go with it. Trimming down the entrance ensured that I wouldn't have to decorate as much, but also gave me something nice and compact to work with. I ultimately couldn't quite decide what to do with the walls. I started out with wood, but ultimately, I ended up moving back to plaster for the walls, as I decided to turn it white to give it a nice modern sort of look. And while I did need to end up deleting all this in the end, it taught me the lesson of what Kingpin taught me. Never be afraid to delete your builds if it means getting it to look nice again. I also took away things that I knew I wanted in the final build, like these windows up front. I wanted people to be able to see into the main entrance of the building, because I wanted people to know what the insides would look like. This here is the point where I realized, actually, I don't really like the wood. I think I should probably change it. So this is when I got the plaster back out. But when I first got it out, I was like, I didn't like the color, so I decided to change it to white, making it more different and looked a lot more clean in the final build, in my opinion. I do just want to go ahead and say here, I apologize if a lot of things get cut, because I'm playing this on my laptop and the camera sometimes just went crazy, so I knew I would have to cut those out of the final video. Here I decided to actually raise it up a bit. That way my entrance would have a little bit of height to it, and not just be one big flat box. Because who likes a big flat box for their entrance? I certainly don't. Once I'd gotten some of the walls in place, I then needed to decide what I was going to do with the door. I decided to have it as a fairly open door, that way I wouldn't need to worry about guests overcrowding it. And I decided to move on to the roof, which I decided to use these nice brown wood tiles to cap off the roof with. Of course, I needed to use the advanced movement tool so that I could actually get the roof in certain places, but I think it turned out alright in the end. I then decided to add a little bit of a rim to the roof, thinking it might be a nice touch to, again, make sure it's not so flat on all the sides. I then went back to going to finish off the rest of the walls, that way the roof actually had something keeping it up. While gravity is not actually a thing in this game, you've got to pretend like it is if you want to make your zoos realistic. I then started to add in some windows to make sure it looked nice and to also let in some natural light, because you can never fully trust the lights that you install. I then decided to go with these glass walls for the big window, as I thought they looked nice and saved me some detailing in the end. I also decided to go back and redo my earlier windows, finding the fancy ones a lot more appealing on the eye. I then ended up changing my mind again and going for these windows that have their top ones blanked out a bit. I thought it might look good for the door as well, but like I said earlier, I ended up just leaving it open, that way guests could just flood in as much as they wanted. I then decided that this inner doorway was still a bit too big, so I decided to use this small bit of plaster wall to actually cave it in a bit and make it just that tad bit shorter, and I think that helped quite a bit. Unfortunately, however, I was left with this very odd glitch that made my walls curve in a bit. However, I saw it as an opportunity to add in a little bit of detail. By using this wood plank, it looks like the building has some actual structural frame. And so I decided to put it wherever I thought it looked the most natural. I then remembered LEGO YouTubers who actually built zoos and used green a lot for their zoo signs on the front entrance of their builds. So I decided to add that by using this grass roof tile from the conservation pack to liven up the roof of my entrance building. Once I had done that, I thought the build was coming along pretty well. So I decided to move on to the next thing, which was me struggling for far too long on how to actually make a gift shop. No joke, I spent far too long trying to figure out how this works. I eventually ended up looking up a YouTube tutorial on how these work, because I could not for the life of me figure it out. But before I did that, I decided to actually add in a entrance for the building, because you Planet Zoo people know that if you don't have the turnstiles, then people won't actually consider themselves in the zoo. So I ended up needing to add one of these. After that, I turned back to trying to get the gift shop to work, which I eventually did. Shout out to this YouTuber right here who helped me to get it working. Once that was done, I turned to actually decorating the gift shop, because obviously you can't go to a zoo and not have a gift shop. You gotta have something so that you can remember your time at the zoo. Then it was just a case of stocking every single shelf with items, such as statues, masks, puzzles, t-shirts, bags, more t-shirts, plushies, even more plushies, spider hats, mugs, and a whole lot of other cool stuff. I then did the zoo sign up top of the entrance building, because you need a zoo sign to know that you're going into a zoo. And while I am temporarily putting zoo, I actually want to hear what you guys think we should call this zoo. I want as many people to interact with this series as possible, so let me know what you want the zoo to be called. I then wanted to find something to help detail the outside of the building, and I found these cool little lights which have some wood frames on them, which I thought would blend in quite well with the wooden frame of the building, and I think it added quite a bit of depth to it. Once that was done, I moved on to doing the lighting on the inside of the building, as obviously not all the sunlight is going to come in through one door. I do apologize for some of the glitching you'll see in the roof. That is overlap. I didn't really notice it at the time, so it never gets fixed. Once that was done, it still felt like something was missing, so I decided to add these support beams for the roof, and I think that really helped quite a bit, because it adds a lot more texture and actually gives the lights something to hold on to. I even added it in the gift shop because I liked it so much. Though I did come into a small problem of the beams did not line up, so I needed to take a moment to fix that before anything else. I then took a moment to step back and admire the build, and I was honestly very impressed with it. I've never built something this good. However, it still felt like the walls were a little bland, so I did everything I could to think of something that would liven up these walls here. At first I thought a sign would be good, but ultimately I chose against it. While trying to figure out what to do, I noticed that the wood frames that I put on the ceiling kind of clipped through the roof, and I was originally going to try and fix it, but I actually ended up liking the pattern, so I ended up duplicating the pieces and moving them up, which gave me a detail I wasn't originally planning for, but ended up looking great. I then moved back to the walls and decided to give them a little trim with some more wood beams. which I ended up putting around the whole of the building, which I think turned out very nicely. I then moved on to adding some greenery at the sides, because I didn't want it to just be barren grass, so I decided to add a couple different trees to each side of the build. This would also ensure that I would have to do less work on the thumbnail. Once that was done, I moved inside to actually work on the spot where guests would hand in their tickets so that they were allowed into the zoo. I then moved on to doing the walls, as while having the white on the outside look nice, I thought the inside could use a bit of a touch-up, so I decided to use these wallpaper pieces to actually liven up the walls a bit. I then moved on to trying to make the walls look interesting, and I tried a couple different signs, but nothing was really sticking. That was until I came across these nice sliced wood bits, which I used to line most of the wall. I did only do 2 walls to start with, but then I just put it on all the walls, because of the idea that I ended up having. And that idea was to add plants just all over it, because it was a very nice natural look, and that's typically what you want in a zoo, to make your zoos look natural. By doing the plants just all over, it gave it a really natural look. I feel like I'm overusing the word natural. I then did a little bit of work on doing the door that would actually lead out into the zoo, because you can't just have an entrance building that wouldn't lead into a zoo, because then what would be the point of coming? Once that was done, I just did some more of what I had already done on the first wall, because I liked it so much that I decided to just add it to another wall, and then later, mostly all the walls. I then realized that the center of the room looked a little empty, so I cycled through a couple of the statues and settled on a dwarf caiman statue, which I ultimately end up deleting, so don't get too attached to it. I then found these cute peacock statues, so I decided to spruce up the roof a bit, add a bit of color to it. I ultimately don't just do the peacocks, I do a rusted lion, a couple elephants, and even add some plants up top. When I started adding greenery, I think that's when the build really came to life for me, and my vision was fully recognized in the build, just by adding just the touch of greenery on the roof. I then moved back inside, and decided to continue with the lush idea, because I really couldn't figure out what to do with the negative space here. I then moved back to the center, realizing that the dwarf caiman statue just really was not the way to go. So I had a look around and decided to go with a planter instead, thinking that might be a better centerpiece, and it's ultimately what I ended up keeping. I then went and added some benches so that guests could have a little sit down if they needed to. I then went back to the roof and decided to add some wooden elephant statues on the higher part of the roof, just to add a tad bit more contrast. But ultimately, that's basically where I finished up, so for now, it's goodbye from me, and onto the glamour shots. Make sure to like, subscribe, do all the good things, and I'll see you guys next time.
tigers play, elephants march in a grand parade, giraffes stretch their necks so high, birdies sing as they fly. Monkeys swinging trees to trees, penguins waddle, feel the breeze, zebras striped black and white,